I finally finished my rough cut.
Oh, fantastic.
Yay!
I have to finish actually editing it to make it watchable as opposed to editing it to the end of the footage. Running behind my own self-set schedule really hard because I set the deadlines and therefore they actually matter because I'm disappointing myself.
It's almost like you need stress to function.
You know, you're right. Must be the ADHD. Anyway, let's introduce ourselves. Interesting cold open. Hello, I am Laura. This is, if I decide to include the face cams, this is the first time that my face is being shown on my Twitch or my YouTube, except for those deleted videos that we don't talk about. And I have gathered here today some lovely people to talk about being a neurodivergent content creator, because our brains work differently. I personally think it's really interesting. I've had some really, really good conversations with people about being neurodivergent and also like working on your own self-set projects while being neurodivergent and comparing that to the rigid pressure of school. So I really wanted to have a conversation on camera and to put that on my channel because I think it's interesting and I want to use my platform to educate other people on how my brain works in case they relate. That was so rambly, it must be the neurodivergence. Joshua, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Joshua. I probably should give more information than that. I am a therapist. I have a Bachelor of Social Work. I have specialized in mental health, in actual one-on-one therapies. I also have worked in the past in groups. These days, mostly people come to see me, and the most common clients I have are people who are neurodivergent, working through autism, ADHD, recognition, inclusion, gender, identity, sexual preference, variations, and trying to work out who the heck they are in a world that says, by the way, here's your template, this is how you're supposed to be, and if you're not that, something's wrong with you, not us. That's not so useful. I can quite well relate to people who are going through a range of different experiences, even if I've not been through that particular one myself, in that I have always felt other in my life. I've often tried to work out why I identify as autistic, and I also have a diagnosis of ADHD. I try not to see myself in everyone I meet, but it's an awful lot of us out there that are not being recognized for who we are and being told the wrong things instead of having us looked at in a reasonable and decent way. So my goal is to basically help people. As such, I have a YouTube channel that is at this point in time that basically says, hey, here's information I think everyone should know about mental health and how to be healthy and how to recognize when that's not working. If it's more complex than that, go see a therapist.
Yes.
Also, happen to be Laura's father, which you may or may not keep.
Also that. I have talked about my father's YouTube channel and mental health stuff before, and I will absolutely have that linked in the iCard, and I really recommend checking that out. Everything I know about mental health and a large amount of neurodivergence and how to be a generally comforting person comes from my parents and especially my father. So offering that knowledge that has made me who I am to a bunch of other people for free, I mean, I vouch for it.
That's the goal. This should be common knowledge. It's not. I want to put the knowledge out there so it can become common knowledge.
I did like a weird little movement, and then I immediately thought about like, oh, that was a weird little movement. Why did I do that? And that's reminding me of a time when in high school for a media and film project, we were having to like record some voice lines, and I was comfortable in front of a camera. I was okay with recording voice lines. Yeah, I was in front of the camera because I was kind of comfortable being in front of a camera. I wanted to get myself used to it. And, you know, that thing where when no one else in the group wants to do something, you're like, all right, I'll do it. I volunteer. Why not? Someone's got to do it. Might as well be me. So I was like reading out the lines and I did like a weird little eyebrow raise on the punctuation. And then when the camera turned off, I was like, why did I do that? Why is that? What I decided to do that was weird. Did that look weird? Should we retake it? And they were like, no, it was fine. It like punctuated the point. It was interesting and dynamic. And the little like weird movement I did just then, and even the interesting and dynamic, I'm looking at that, I'm like, is that me? Is that masking? Is that trying to engage my audience? Like, look at me. How much energy am I actually putting into how I look? How much of this is genuine? What is the real me? I don't know. That's a constant ongoing existential crisis. Anyway, Worm, how are you?
Okay, I'm really bad at talking about myself. I don't know what to... Hi, I'm I am Twitch streamer. I don't do YouTube. Editing's not good. I can't do it.
Continue.
I am autistic and I have ADHD, and I've been struggling with pretty, I don't say severe, but pretty bad mental health for most of my life. I am a very anxious person, so it's kind of surprising for me that I am a Twitch streamer because I put myself in front of a camera to be perceived by lots of people. For some reason it's comforting. In any other situation I would freak out and run away. But yeah, I don't really know what else to say about myself.
That works.
Yeah, I just rambled and said a lot of unnecessary things. Ah,
That is how our communication works. That works as an introduction. That's why you're here. You've got neurodivergence. You've got some life experiences that I don't have. You've got experiences I can't talk about. And we will learn more about you as the discussion goes on and as we see fit. I think that was a great introduction. I think one of the things that makes content creation a lot easier than putting yourself on a stage, which to be fair is content creation, but like public speaking and Twitch streaming or video creation is a lot different because there's that guise of anonymity. There is a screen between me. And also if you need to, you can turn it off at any point. You can be like, my brain is not available for this anymore, so goodbye. Whereas it's a lot harder to do that on a stage. I think it's that social convention thing, right? There's sort of a script and a set of rules that we expect to follow with social conversations, especially when you're in a face-to-face environment. You kind of get shoved into that box more.
Face-to-face with unknown other puts you into an unscripted territory. You don't know what they're going to do. You don't know how they're going to do things. You don't know what you're going to have to talk about. Am I making too much eye contact or not enough? Am I speaking too fast or too slow? Am I putting enough emphasis in my tone? Do you understand what I'm saying? Do you need me to make this simpler, or have I gone too low, and now you think I'm splaining at you? Do I have to write? It's too unscripted. It's too complex. Many autistic and ADHD people find themselves in the arts, and a lot of the arts also includes being on stage or in front of a camera, following a script, following a role. And the advantage of that is you know what you're supposed to be doing because it's scripted, rehearsed, and practiced, or you know what the format is. And because you're talking to a camera and people might be texting you back, you have additional time to figure out your response rather than having to do it at lightning fast speed. It's just a lot easier.
It gives you control.
And also, if you're running a workshop, you are running the workshop. Being a participant in a workshop is so much harder because you don't really know what the person running the workshop wants you to do unless you've done it before, in which case, why are you doing it again? It's too complex. And complexity is hard for anyone with an autistic brain when it comes to people.
It wasn't necessarily misspeaking. I couldn't find the word I was thinking of. I said social script. I think I meant social contract. This is based on things you have taught me in the past.
So social script is, hi, how are you?
Yeah.
How interesting. How's your day been? That's fascinating. What about that sports team? That's the script.
Yeah, the script is like...
the contract is, if you're nice to me, I should be nice to you.
Yeah.
That's the contract.
It feels like part of that social contract means you can't just walk away if you don't want to be here anymore, which is like how salespeople in stores get you, because they're like, hi, do you have a moment to talk about my product? But they're so charismatic and they're being so nice to you, and it would be rude to just walk away. And if you're the first one to make a rude move, then so it's like until they do something they're not supposed to, you're trapped in that. Oh my god, this is the faith thing. This is the...
Unless you realize they've already broken the contract by breaking into your space. And then you realize, oh wait, whilst you're using the script and the contract to trap me, you've already broken the contract, invalidating my obligation to be polite and stay in the conversation.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's kind of within Fae mythology. If you claim to be a guest in the home, they cannot act against you or act with malintent. They cannot harm you in any way. You are under their protection until you are impolite, rude, or break a rule.
And then then you're no longer a guest, you're no longer protected, they can do whatever they like.
So
Yes.
we're sort of trapped in that social contract by the rules everyone tells us is the case. I think that is one of the reasons why doing this on a screen is easier than going on stage and talking to people, because there's that sort of separation between the typical social contract and the control, which is why I liked YouTube a lot more before I gained the confidence to do Twitch, because I knew what I wanted to present myself as and how I wanted to interact. I could edit everything out until I sort of upped my confidence levels, and now I'm okay just having people perceive me all the time and not being able to cut out my vocal stumbles or when I just completely lose track of what I was trying to say.
Two thoughts I got in what you're talking about there, Laura. One, if I can remember it, is explicit versus implicit rule sets. Explicit means someone has specifically said, here is a rule you should follow for reasons. And sometimes the reasons make sense, sometimes the reason is absent, and sometimes the reason is terrible. But at least it's a rule that you know you're supposed to follow. And in Twitch, in YouTube, in things where you are in control, you know the explicit rules. In conversations with neurotypicals or other people that you don't know well, there's a whole bunch of implicit rules you're supposed to know that no one's actually told you. They know when to break the explicit rules because of this implicit rule. You don't. When you break the explicit rule, thinking you've understood it, you've got the implicit rule wrong and you're in trouble. And so it seems almost unfair. I can't remember what the other thing was I was going to talk about.
I have something I'd like to bring up. Touching kind of on what you said about a lot of neurodivergent people having careers in the arts. I am a musical theatre performer. I'm currently in a show and I have really bad social anxiety and agoraphobia. So leaving my house, talking to people is terrifying for me. With theatre, because everything is so blocked out, well rehearsed, you know exactly what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, how you're supposed to do it, what you're supposed to say, how you're supposed to act, how you're supposed to look when delivering a line, singing something. The amount of organization in it all is really comforting. I was going to say, I don't know why. I know exactly why. If you're playing a character, you're on stage playing that character, no one's going to judge you for that because they know that you're acting as a person. If you mess up, if you say something wrong, if you look different, if you act like unconventional, I guess, no one's gonna know, which is so different to like everyday life.
Yes, we aren't judged for being us and failing to be them. And by us, I mean neurodivergent people, which includes autism, ADHD, and a host of other subgroups. Them being the most typical group, the common people, the average person. There's an expectation of how you present to look like and fit into the neurotypical system, and neurodivergent people struggle with that because that's not natural. That's something you mask to look like you are doing that. You're camouflaging. There's also a comfort in repetition. As you repeat a role, you get to know the role well, you know the parameters of it, and it feels good. It feels safe, it feels okay. If that changes, it's new territory, it's uncomfortable, and you're not sure if you got it right. And there's a terror in the uncertain, in the new things that can be anxiety inducing. A lot of anxiety for autistic people, especially social anxiety, that is where you're anxious about how the other people you're interacting with will perceive you, accept you, and work with you, is the uncertainty about how they're going to perceive, accept, and welcome you. When you hang around people you know better, the anxiety drops down somewhat. And when you hang around people who get you without you having to explain everything in lots of detail, the anxiety drops down again. But the easiest anxiety drop for social anxiety is being blind. But that means the anxiety is actually a traumatic response to being judged or not accepted or being told that what you are doing, which seems natural to you, is wrong, but not why.
I not make or keep friendships at school. I don't want to say it's not that I don't fit in, even though it's probably because I'm in an environment with neurotypicals and nobody else that I like am friends with at school is neurodivergent. We've got a really good psychologist at school, and she said to me a while back, when you're at school, you're forced to get along with people that you would never get along with outside of that environment. I haven't spoken to many, but I've spoken to a few neurodivergent people who, like me, have struggled to make and keep friendships in a high school environment just because, first of all, teenagers with hormones are awful.
Just the worst.
It's hard to be a part of a group that you can't necessarily fit into anyway, because by masking, you're not completely yourself. you are forcing yourself to be a version of you that gets uncomfortable and isn't truly who you are. I have found that just in general, I have better, longer lasting, more fulfilling, beneficial friendships with people who are neurodivergent rather than people who are neurotypical. And everyone I know in high school, except for a couple people, neurotypical. And we got along. We don't really, friendships change, but like, it's kind of interesting. Like, I've been better friends with people with similar conditions to me than people who don't relate to anything that I've been through, which I think is kind of an interesting thing to talk about.
Yeah.
On the numbers front, according to the World Health Organization, averaging across the world, give or take a little bit, 1 in 10 people could be diagnosed with ADHD. 1 in 30 people could be diagnosed with autism. For that ADHD diagnosis to be workable on a medical front, you have to be struggling enough with it that your traits are getting in your way. So there might be more than 1 in 10 people with ADHD. They're not struggling enough that the medical system needs to intervene. And the same with autism. Mostly they want to diagnose if your traits are strong enough that you need a support person. If you're okay without a support person but you're struggling, do we need to diagnose you? To get someone who has both ADHD plus autism, that's a bit rarer, but still relatively common, especially in my field where I'm helping people who are struggling a lot. A lot of the people I work with are both autistic and have ADHD. Now, if we start in 1 in 10, 1 in 30, combine the two, they multiply out, we're looking at in 1 in 100, 1 in a couple of hundred, and then of course adding in, as you said, Worm, similar experiences, because just because someone is both ADHD and autistic doesn't mean they've had similar experiences to you and may not be relatable, or their ADHD might be quite different to your ADHD and they're not compatible even though they come from a similar base root.
Yes.
Effectively, that can mean that you might be a rare type of brain, 1 in 5,000. The average high school in Australia is somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 students. So the odds of there being 2 of you in the one school is rare. Thus, you have to work with and interact with people who are not your people, but you have to pretend to be like them enough that they'll accept, and you have to follow their systems and try and work that out, and they're not very clear about that.
Yeah.
Outside of school, you can find people that are on your frequency, that you vibe with, that you get, and they get you. And that's what I think your school counsellor was referring to with inside the school, it's an unnatural environment. You wouldn't choose these people, but they're the people you must choose from or be lonely. Outside of school, you find the people you would choose and the loneliness drops down.
If I was like given that choice, I would choose to not really have any friends at school, just because like you said, there is another person in my friendship group who has ADHD, but they have more hyperactive symptoms. I have the more inattentive symptoms. So it's completely different. We can't relate really to a lot of things, but it's not socially acceptable to not have any friends at school either. So it's like, do you want to be forced to fit into this group that ruins your mental health, makes you unhappy, or do you want to be judged and picked on because you're choosing to benefit yourself over other people and society standards?
Ruins your health and puts you in danger. And the thing about having a friendship group that you can sort of rely on is numbers are safety, loneliness is dangerous.
I had 2 thoughts. Both of them are kind of quick. There was a kid in the year above me, 2 years above me, who did not have any friends, who spent the whole of like recess and lunch on their own, doing their own things, often like teaching themselves skills, quite physical skills that nobody else wanted to join in on. I thought they were super cool, and I looked at them and I was like, yeah, I get you. And everyone was like, oh, they're so weird. They don't have any friends. Clearly no one wants to be friends with them. I had some conversations with this kid on the bus, and I was like, yeah, you're cool. You get me. You make sense. You do not want to be my friend. You don't want friends. That's actually kind of awesome that this kid just accepted. None of you are like me. I'm going to be out of here soon. I'm just going to get by. Say about me whatever you're going to say. I can't stop you. I'm gonna have fun. I'm gonna take care of myself. It was really interesting and really cool that I got to talk to someone who was okay with that. My second thought is that recently I've been seeing one post a lot of times on the internet that points out that ADHD is named after the symptoms of it that neurotypical people find most annoying.
while autism is not named that way, is diagnosed that way. And so often in the medical model, detection for different brain types, different neurologies, which is not a mental health issue, it's a mental difference. However, often not being accepted gives you mental health issues, and it's important to differentiate the two. But often different brain types and different neurologies are defined on a deficit model. How is it that you are not like me? How are you failing in this environment? That's how we're going to spot you and label you. We don't look at the pros that autism or ADHD give you. We only look at the cons. And that way, accidentally, I hope, these labels become stigmatized because we only define them on deficits.
I think often that means that when somebody finds out that they're a part of this community, they're like, oh no, first. A lot of people have the experience of, in a very similar way to some queer experiences, figuring out your identity and then saying, but that's the thing that everyone says is bad. If you were raised in a homophobic environment and you figure out that you're queer in any way, you're like, that is the thing that has been villainized my whole life. When you're raised in a neurotypical society and you figure out that you're neurodivergent, if you don't have positive experiences and positive connotations to it, it can feel really scary and isolating. And especially if you don't have friends who have similar experiences that you can go, hey, help me out here, tell me about you so that I can learn more about me, it can be really scary, and you can fear losing these connections that you have worked so hard to get because they don't come to you that easily, especially when they're all neurotypical. But what are you supposed to do? Which I think is one of the reasons it's so important for us to talk about this and to say, hey, this is me. If you're like me, you're not alone.
I find it really interesting, kind of touching back on how they diagnose these conditions with things that are most inconvenient to other people. I was looking through the DSM, and all of like the criteria, I guess, were just things that were inconveniences either to me or to someone else. It's really interesting to think about because there are so many like amazing things that neurodivergent people can do. Like, speaking from personal experience, I have taught myself over 10 instruments. I hyperfixate on things like music and all that. I can teach myself these things just by listening to it. That's not something a neurotypical brain can do. There's a bunch of other stuff, but like, it's just really interesting that everyone focuses on the negative parts about being neurodiverse, and there are so many incredible things that we do and we can achieve. Like, some of the smartest people are autistic, had ADHD.
Totally. We are currently talking to each other using technology that was not designed, created, and inspired by a neurotypical person. Each part of this technology was created by someone who thought differently, who did not fit, who hyperfixated or had this idea beyond the box that neurotypicals draw for their own safety. We are doing this because neurodivergent people were allowed to create. Without neurodivergent people, without people who think differently and go, wonder what would happen if I do this thing, we would still be living in caves as a species. We would not have developed writing. We would not have communicated effectively like we do. And yet we are the people who are told, actually sit back down and learn it my way.
I wanted to add on to that. A lot of what you said about how neurodivergent people create things that have never been seen before, like inventing the internet. And I mean, I've made Discord servers. I don't have any evidence to back this up, but I would be surprised if the team made that was neurotypical. Because it makes sense intuitively, unlike so many other things, which means that it's because it thinks like me. Anyway, I think the other thing that really lends itself to creating and inventing is not just I have an idea, I'm hyperfixating on it until I figure out how to make it work, but the fact that neurodivergent brains link concepts together where a lot of other things wouldn't. It's that linking of concepts. In a lot of cases, not every case obviously, but in a lot of cases, linking this and this together in a way no one's thought of before lets you figure out how to do something that no one has done before.
Neurotypical people can do this too. They just aren't as good at it. It's not as natural. And frequently they are mimicking how neurodivergent people do that very thing. A great example, in my opinion, not good evidence backing this up, is engineers. Not all engineers are autistic, but a lot of them are. Autistic engineers are the ones frequently who are able to pick up a new language of software or a new architecture very rapidly, understand it intuitively, push it further, create a new thing, write a quick manual, put it down. They have a system for how they are going to create new technologies and information, and they try to explain this to neurotypical people. This is how I created this thing. And we call that creation process engineering. Then neurotypical people who decide, yeah, I can do this engineering thing, have to learn the autistic, logical thinking, scientific method, and they learn autistic speak.
That makes sense. Personally, I've never met a neurotypical engineer, and I know more engineers than I ever expected to know in my day-to-day life. That's not to say they don't exist.
I'm sure they do.
They have to. Theoretically, they have
Not
to.
all engineers.
Pardon? No.
Hashtag not all engineers.
Kind of want to backpedal to the way that neurodivergence is diagnosed. A little bit about my experience. I always knew I learned differently. Like, since I was in first year of primary school, my teachers would say to my parents, she learns like a boy. I went to an all-girls school. I've been to an all-girls school for my whole life. All of my teachers have said she doesn't learn the same as everyone else in the class. She learns differently.
That sounds like a
It's like-
clue.
Yeah, no one really picked up on it till 2019. In 2018, I did a little bit of research and I was like, I think I might have ADHD. And so in 2019, I went to a psychiatrist. And he was like, get cognitive testing done, look out for these certain things, and we'll see. And so I got the cognitive testing done, and there were different things that were a lot lower than other things. And coming out of that, I was like, this is really weird. I got diagnosed with previously called ADD, not ADHD, but, you know, kind of the same thing, really. It's just I'm not
Different presentation.
hyperactive. Fast forward to late last year, I think it was. I was talking to my therapist, who I've been seeing for 2 years now. I was like, I think I might be autistic. And I was explaining everything. And we talked about it recently, a couple weeks ago. And she was like, I can't believe I never picked up on the fact that you were autistic. It was so blatantly obvious. Everyone except the people that needed to see
Yes.
there was something different, and that's really interesting to me. I've got like the full report, the cognitive abilities test, and all of the stuff that was lower lines up with an autistic brain. I find it so interesting how dyslexia and dyscalculia are linked with autism and ADHD. I have dyscalculia. I've never understood maths and science and problem solving, and the fact that no one realized that until recently, that could be another contributing factor.
I have some theories on that. Again, not well backed up by the research I've been able to do. But basically, autism is a different way of thinking. That's the best description I've got of it, which often looks like dyslexia, dyscalculia, struggling to understand and pick up social cues, because what does that really mean? Dysgeographia, you get lost just going out to your back drive. Dyspraxia, which is where you are clumsy in certain ways, and yet elegantly graceful in others. Often comes with it, not always. Just all these things. But that also means that we have hugely different sensory profiles, where we can be hypersensitive to certain stimuli, which either means that we sense it beyond the average person's range, hyper or hypo, or we find that that particular stimulus is particularly either painful for the phobic or really nice for the philic. So one of the ways I check to see if the person I'm working with is autistic is I check their sensory profile. Them quick and dirty ones. Are there noises that really upset, anger, sadden you that no one else cares about? That's one that you're reacting to that most people aren't. Or another sensory aspect is being able to pick out signal from noise. So speech is a signal. In the background, we could have music, and that would be noise. It's not the signal I'm trying to get across to you. For you to be able to hear my words and make sense of that over the top of background music or a crowd's murmuring susurration is hard. The neurotypicals aren't struggling in pubs to hear each other, but many of the autistic or ADHD people are.
Yeah.
But not all, because different brains process and adjust the different things. So you may have learnt how to focus in on someone and hear their words in background noise, but it's tiring. Or maybe this one isn't your problem, it's more about the dyscalculia because the numbers don't make sense the way they've been presented to you. And why we're doing this math thing?
It's different for every brain, but these are similarities that a lot of neurodivergent people have. It's not, you need all of these things to be neurodivergent. It is, these things tend to be more common with neurodivergent brains, and sometimes they go hand in hand, and sometimes they don't.
And as you were saying, Worm, being able to learn all these musical instruments because your brain is adaptive that way. It's able to go, I can take this skill here, change it a little, apply it in this different orientation to this thing, and now suddenly I can do with this what I was doing with this, but in this way. Neurotypical people struggle with that. They're very different skills. They're sort of related, but they're different enough that it's hard to translate across. So often ADHD people will pick up skills very rapidly, but then they hit a limit and walk away. Bored now. Where's the challenge? Go ahead.
You keep going. I have a squirrel-ish.
Which often means I've been squirreling for the last 5 minutes.
Yeah, that's
Squirrel,
how conversation works.
means where something else hits your brain and you go, oh, I want to tell you about this too. And then hopefully you get back. That's a common reason why ADHD people will pick up a hobby for 3 weeks to 3 months, sometimes 3 years. And then the switch in your brain goes off and you're like, I don't want to do this anymore.
You guys can keep a hobby for more than a day? What's with that?
That was me with editing YouTube videos. I was like, this is really cool for like a day.
You tried so hard, and I was so proud of you, especially because I know you've tried before, and I know you hated every moment of it. So the fact that you spent like a day editing, I was like, oh my goodness.
I enjoyed it that evening when we were editing together. That was really cool. And then the next day I tried to get up and do it, and I was like, I just want to slam my head through a frickin' wall.
So maybe body doubling is important while you edit. We could have more editing parties where you stop me from trying to strangle a program on a computer, and I stop you from trying to slam your head through a wall because it's frustrating by just hanging out together. And
amazing as that sounds, the idea of editing makes me want to like
that's fair.
Scream.
That's fair.
For you, Worm, editing is dead until your brain lets it, whatever it hates, go. And that's going to take some time. Don't stress. It'll be fine. And you may never want to pick it up again. That's fine too. However, doing something that you're struggling with but haven't not been able to do anymore, whilst Shaylora is editing so that Shaylora gets that company but doesn't have to interact on a strong basis. I mean, Shaylora will get more editing done and you'll get to do what you want to do that you need that other person around, like sometimes cleaning, sorting the room, things that really do well with a support person. Whereas, of course, if you're editing the audio part of the video, then it's really difficult to do that.
My favorite heavy sarcasm part of my brain is that sometimes the only way I have the energy to edit the audio is if I have 12 different background sounds playing at the same time. And considering that I am most easily overstimulated by sound and smell, having 12 different background sounds is not good for my brain. There was a period there where it was the only time I could get anything done. That was not fun. I don't want to do that one again. Let's not do that one again.
That is the complete opposite of me. Like, my biggest issue is auditory processing. If the TV's on downstairs and I can hear it from my room, I've got to have noise cancelling headphones on to focus on something I'm watching. Or if I'm out, like, on my way to therapy, as an example, if I overhear people talking on the tram and I'm just trying to listen to my music, I have to have my music at full volume whether I want it to be that loud or not. I can't enjoy focusing on something if I can hear something else, because my brain will be like, oh, what's going on there? My brain try to latch onto what's going on around me, and it's like, no, I want to listen to this, I want to focus on this, I'm enjoying this, and then it gets me really overstimulated and I freak out and it gets me really overwhelmed.
And yet you can do music, which requires a lot of audio processing. So it's not that your brain can't process audio well, it's that it processes it differently, making it difficult to do human speech and other things, which is interesting. ADHD is often sensory seeking up to a certain value, and if it goes over that, boom, too much. Autism is often sensory avoidant or sensory singular, like you want to feel this but not hear that at the same time. If you've got both ADHD and autism brain, then you got to work out which one's more dominant right now. Am I needing more sound or less sound? Or is this the point of sound that I need? Because this one needs to be up because of ADHD and this one needs to be down at autism, and we're found this balance point. And trying to get that just right is sometimes hard. Sometimes you need to turn the music up to do the thing. Sometimes you need to turn it down.
And sometimes we need a different sensory input as well. Like, I have had times when I'm editing where I'm like, something feels wrong, and I'm adjusting all of the audio things, and I'm like, no, it was worse than it was before. And then I figured out that I need a fan pointed at me so that I have fresh air towards me as a temperature and a movement. There have been times in school where I felt like I couldn't focus on anything, and I was overwhelmed and underwhelmed at the same time before I realized that what my brain really wanted was for me to put water on my arm so that it could feel the water against the AC of the room and feel it slowly evaporate from my skin. And until I had that sensation going on, nothing was okay. Nothing satisfied me until I could find a way to give myself the sensory input that I needed. So it's not always just audio.
And up until you could regulate your sensory inputs to be something safe for you and right for you, your brain could not work on other things, because this is the challenge that needs to be sorted right now. You weren't hurting anyone in doing that, but it wouldn't have been uncommon for a teacher to tell you off for doing this self-regulatory thing.
This is kind of related, but a tiny bit different. I cannot sleep unless I've got a fan on.
I was about to get onto that.
I have to have it on the second level. It can't be any higher, it can't be any lower. And the white noise of it helps me sleep. It's very loud. Part of it's for a sensory thing, like I just can't sleep. I don't sleep well. I don't sleep well anyway. I sleep better with this.
The white noise for your brain is creating enough noise that other signals aren't getting through, so you can let everything else go.
It's one of the only noises I can have going while I'm trying to focus. Like if I'm like watching a movie or watching one of my comfort shows, I can still have the fan in the background while I do that, because it's like source of comfort and like it just calms me down. And I also love like the feeling of cold air on me when I'm trying to sleep, because I get really warm when I sleep. So yeah.
Three most common devices ADHD people use to sleep if they need noise is a fan, the TV, their phone either playing music or a podcast, or a white noise generator.
Adding on to that, I always fall asleep watching TV on my computer.
For me, I prefer people quietly talking. So I put on podcasts so that I can ignore them and then I can sleep. And if I don't do that, I have to stay awake until I'm exhausted and finally drop off to sleep. Then there's the danger where I'm dropping off to sleep. There's that slight fall, and then I might end up with the monkey reflex of reaching out to grab onto things, and my heart goes tick, 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 and I'm awake now. And now it's going to be another 15-30 minutes until I can sleep. Exhaustion sleep is not fun because of that startle reflex. Awful. I much rather have noise, but that makes it hard to share my room with other people. Sleep problems are a common thing for ADHD, sometimes also with autism, but because everything is spectrum, which I think we really need to highlight at some point. So autism, spectrum, disorder, we don't call it disorder when it's in your way. Otherwise, it's just autism, but it's on a spectrum. ADHD is also on a spectrum, but it's not a spectrum, it's spectrums. Both. People frequently mistake autism as being low functioning to high functioning. No. That was bad phrasing, where low functioning was autism comorbid with intellectual disability. I'm not high functioning, dark haired because I don't have an intellectual disability. You either have an intellectual disability or you don't. What's that got to do with autism? Nothing, except that autistic traits were easier to spot in people that didn't have the intellectual capability of masking and hiding that. We really need to separate them out. That is not the spectrum we refer to. It's things like some people who are autistic can't handle high frequency sounds, and some people can't handle low frequency sounds, and some people have no issues with sounds. That's a spectrum. There are bunches of different spectrums. Some people function really well socializing with others, especially other autistic people, and some people can't socialize with pretty much anyone. Some people are very verbose, speaking a lot, and some people are mostly mute. That's another spectrum. ADHD also existing on multiple spectrums. One of those spectrums is the sleep one, where some ADHD people sleep every other day because that's what you can get, and you get kind of used to it, but it's not fun. Some ADHD people need sound stimulation to sleep. Some ADHD people need silence to sleep. Some ADHD people sleep a lot, especially if you have the fatigue form of ADHD. So hyperactivity, can't sit still, always doing stuff, fatigue, everything is hard. You're yawning all the time and you just need to sleep. So spectrum, just because you have the same label doesn't mean you have the same experience, although often it comes from a similar source. ADHD is about executive function and how well that processes dopamine. The medication given for it helps you access your own natural dopamine better. It's not adding dopamine to the system for the most part. It's freeing up your access executive function part of your brain to the dopamine you naturally have, without having to resort to adrenaline, which often comes from anxiety, anger, or problems, chaos, or using the other method, which is trying to do happy stuff. Because when we do things that are pleasing, we're rewarded with dopamine and serotonin and endorphins. Executive function takes a look at that dopamine we just got for having fun and goes, thank you very much. I can use that, which sometimes leads to things like binge eating to feel better, or doing other things like online shopping, gambling, or drugs. Don't do drugs, kids.
Anything that gives you that spark of energy that you can then use to actually do the things you want to do or you need to do. Need to do is a lot less fun, but it sucks so much when I don't have the energy to do the thing that I want to be doing. I don't have anything constructive to say with that. It's annoying.
Something my therapist and I are working on at the moment. We're doing trauma therapy, but we're also figuring out things that can help regulate my sensory needs in a healthy way. So we've identified that like the smell of peppermint gives me that sense that you're talking about. Certain music, like a certain music genre, certain albums, all that stuff. I'll like get it and show you. I like carry around this little tiny little bag. It's usually got more stuff in it of little stim toys that help regulate. It helps with all of that stuff. I just find it really cool that like we're able to identify things and put it into practice for a lot of different things. Personally, it helps regulate how I feel. It also provides a sense of safety, which is really important when working through trauma.
Yeah, I was about to say, a lot of that stuff can also probably be used to help ground yourself so you don't get lost in what your brain says is happening, and you can focus on what actually is and the fact that you are safe and okay right now.
Another thing that we do that we really only identified a couple days ago in our last session is that distracting myself through positive conversations about things that I like. Oftentimes, I go nonverbal when I'm overwhelmed. I can't speak. I don't like talking. I physically can't. Even if I wanted to, I couldn't say what I want to say. And it's happened a lot of times in therapy. A way that I'm able to ground myself and get myself to talk again is being asked questions about things that I've got a really big interest in. So like some of my long-standing hyperfixation, things I've loved for many years, we bring up and we talk about, and she lets me info dump about certain things because it helps bring me back to that window of tolerance, that safe space. And it's really good to put all of that into practice for a lot of different things, not just for regulating symptoms that come about with autism, with trauma, with anxiety. It's really cool how we can put little things into practice for a lot of different big things.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Just for the audience, autistic people will frequently do a thing called stimming, which is where you're using your senses to self-soothe. So that could be, Shayla is demonstrating with the death clap. It can be
I'm just like
rubbing,
shaking my hands in a place the camera can see. Usually I do lower it down, but it can't see that. I still like that.
It
One
could
of
be,
my favorite ones is spinning a ring.
yes. However, that could also be fidgeting, which is more of an ADHD thing.
Yeah, this is kind of more fidgeting for me.
Yeah, so if it's about the touch contact and the regularity, you're probably stimming. Whereas if you are more clicking, usually higher speed, That's more fidgeting. And
Yeah.
that's getting movement happening, enabling your vestibular system to amp up, which helps your brain release dopamine. Whereas stimming is usually slower and is more about soothing yourself and introspection.
Really
Yeah,
like
like
running my nails along. I also find that my shaky hands, which the camera cannot pick up, I find that that's a stim. That's not
And that-
fidgeting.
yeah, because it's about the feel, that
Yeah.
feeling it, and that can be also rocking or shaking and so forth. For people listening to this, if you find that this is triggering for you, then please consider getting support whilst listening to this, or wait until you're strong enough to listen to this.
Yes.
And please have your emergency contact numbers available in case you, as a result of listening to this, dysregulate and need help.
Yes, and I will definitely put a trigger warning on screen, and I will probably move that before us beginning to talk about this so that you guys
Power of
know
it.
you guys can make informed decisions, protect yourselves, take care of yourselves.
Maybe putting like times that you can skip to if they want to
Yes.
avoid this but watch the rest of the video.
And sometimes, especially with ADHD autism combination, the same movement can work for both. But if you feel dysregulated, lost, and possibly starting to disassociate or in the middle of disassociation, and you can no longer bring your cognition into grounding, sometimes people go into self-harm where you are, instead of running your fingers, you're digging your fingernails in because the pain will start getting you some adrenaline, which releases dopamine. Or if you're cutting, don't cut if you can avoid it, or some other self-harmful behavior, which can include social harm and physical harm or suicidal ideation, intrusive, awful images, anything to trick your brain into thinking you're in an emergency situation so you can get some adrenaline and dopamine. So frequently when I'm working with youth who are self-harming, I start doing ADHD checks, because if you haven't been checked yet, that might be why you keep going back to that stuff. It's not necessarily because your situation is awful.
Yeah.
Although it's not uncommon that you've got both situations happening, both ADHD in yourself, and because it's hereditary, there may be ADHD in the family that's not being detected and someone else is behaving poorly, which is affecting you, which is now dysregulating you. We need to address all of that.
Once you know what you're using the harmful behavior to achieve, it's easier to, theoretically easier, I can't speak from personal experience much on this, but it is probably easier to move that into something more healthy and maybe theoretically even more effective once you know what you need, why you need it, and when you need it.
Yes.
Like, self-knowledge can help you fix the problem before it gets to the point where you need to take action, because you don't have to tip over before you know what needs to be fixed.
Very much so. So a lot of the work I do at that point, along with, if it's ADHD, trying to get someone off to a referral so that they can get properly diagnosed and start getting access to medication, which will help regulate the dopamine system, because that's what the medicine does. If you don't have your own system, store-bought is fine. The next step is, whilst waiting for that to happen, is start helping the person learn insight into what is the warning signs that you're about to hit this level of extreme dopamine loss in your executive function, such that you need to do something else to get some dopamine. At the point where you catch yourself in the middle of doing some harmful behavior, can you stop and do one of these other behaviors first and then do that self-harm, but without a fatal end, until you can self-regulate? So that we're minimizing damage, we're trying to introduce substitutes, and we're trying to head it off before we even get to that aspect. But often, not much we can do until the ADHD has been confirmed and you've got some medication.
I can speak from personal experience on this sort of thing. Last year especially, I struggled a lot with self-harm, suicidal ideation, suicide attempt, which is basically the root of the trauma stuff that I'm working through with my therapist, so I don't know how much I'll be able to talk about it all.
Whatever you're comfortable with.
And important note, if after this recording you say, actually, I'm not okay with that, I can just cut it out of the video. So there is like 2 levels of being okay, what you're okay with now and what you're okay with later. Continue.
So speaking from personal experience, I, for a lot of last year while all of this was going on, didn't really realize that I was neurodivergent. I knew I had ADHD. I wasn't too sure that I had autism until late last year, earlier this year. I think the first conversation I had with my therapist about it was November of last year. So it's still pretty recent, all things considered. Part of the reason why we're working through different coping strategies is to try to give myself the dopamine that self-harm effectively gave. For me, I found it was an easier way to cope with what I was feeling, going through these really intense emotions that I couldn't handle myself. It was like, well, I need to feel some sort of release. I need a form of release that will temporarily, I didn't consciously know it was a temporary release. Looking back on it, it was definitely temporary from how I was feeling. By me saying all of this, I'm not condoning those sorts of actions.
I'm wondering if it was both a temporary release and a form of gaining control. Like, if I'm going to feel this anyway, it might as well be because of something that I can control.
I was about to touch on that. Yeah. By me saying all this, I'm not condoning or encouraging that way of coping at all.
A lot of people are using these methods to survive, and if that's what is necessary to survive, okay, but please engage with suicide intervention services. And ideally, if you've recognized and felt, wow, this stuff about the ADHD makes a lot of sense, okay, that is key information for the people trying to help you in the health services. A lot of public hospitals in Australia are not good with ADHD. You will have to go private. We aren't saying, hey, try this self-harm method to self-regulate. No. It's a last resort, but it's better than death.
Part of it is if you know why, you can start solutions. I know we said that already, but mentioning it again.
Good, worth emphasizing.
Yeah.
Knowledge, power to change. And we're trying to inform so that people can make better decisions and get support to get past this, because you can't do it on your own.
Yeah.
If you could, you wouldn't be using this pathway.
This is not a suggestion, this is an explanation, and this is not only relevant to people who are struggling with such things. I have used this knowledge to help friends in the past. Even if you don't relate to anything we're saying, someone you know might. So it's still, I think, a good idea to listen and to learn and to try to understand, even if you don't relate yourself.
Another thing that I found, which unfortunately is a pretty big thing among those who use cutting as a coping strategy, is it was a way to prove to myself I was actually going through things, because it was physical. It was there. I could see it. I knew that something was going on because I had physical injuries. And it got to the point where leading up to attempt, that felt like the only way I was going to get better from what I was going through. Especially because I didn't know that I was autistic as well. The late diagnosis did not help with any of that, because I was like, I don't belong, I don't fit in, there is something wrong with me, I am not made to fit in with this world, which is true. My therapist said to me the other day, no wonder you're exhausted because you're trying to survive in a world that wasn't made for you.
Yeah.
So in a way, I was right. I'm in an environment that's not catered to how my brain works, but for me, in that moment, the only way out is just not being here, which is, I've realized after, what's the month? Almost a year. There are so many different ways to cope, to deal with all of this stuff, to live in a way that's beneficial for you, not just for society and societal standards. And one of the main reasons I'm talking about this is it's been 10 months. I haven't tried to kill myself since then. I haven't really self-harmed since then. I have been able, in working with professionals, to discover new strategies, ways to cope. They're helping me in the same way I thought that stuff did, in a much healthier way, in ways that can help my quality of life, help how I am on a day-to-day basis, and are just overall a lot healthier. And it also means I'm not in the hospital every couple of weeks. So that's always good.
And hospitals are not a good place for people that have ADHD or borderline personality disorder or undiagnosed ADHD, or pretty much any neurological difference from the mainstream. The hospitals are a place for containment, not for healing, but people who are neurodivergent. Mileage may vary. Just be aware, if you're struggling with hospital, it's not your fault. The system is not designed well with you in mind. And as soon as you get certain labels, the hospital will basically patch you up and get you out because they're aware that they're not a safe place. Don't take it personally. They just don't know how to do better. You're safer at home until you're not safe. Go to hospital, and then they'll get you out back home as quickly as they can.
So I was in hospital 6 times last year. Only one of those times was I admitted to a psychiatric unit. I was on that ward for 2 weeks. I got absolutely nothing out of it. My attempt was a week after I was discharged. In my brain, I thought that it was my fault. I thought that the reason why I didn't get anything out of it, I admitted myself. I was involved with the CAMS team at the time, and I was like, I need to help in a safer environment because I was in the emergency department every couple of days at that point.
Can you define CAMS for the audience?
Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services. They're basically the outpatient mental health team at a hospital.
And they're designed for subacute people. That is, people that are at high risk or high complexity, but not quite enough to be in the hospital, but not low enough to give to standard therapists.
Yes, I was on that ward for about 2 weeks. I felt like I was getting worse in there, and I couldn't explain why. It was the neurodivergence, but I didn't know that. I spoke to a psychiatrist in there. I was explaining everything I was going through, and she goes, "You know that you could be autistic." I was like, no. Oh, how the turntables. I got nothing out of it. A week later, I was back in hospital for my attempt. Part of me thought it was because of me. Part of me thought it was because of the hospital. I was like, the hospital doesn't do anything. It's a flawed program. And I even spoke to the CAMS worker that I was with at the time. And I was like, I got nothing out of that. Why is it not working for me? And she goes, you would be better suited in a private hospital environment. But not everyone has access to private healthcare, so I never got that. But yeah, it's really interesting that like a lot of neurodivergent people have the same experience in hospitals. They feel like they're not listened to. They feel like they're not taken seriously. They feel like they're not getting the help that they need. And in reality, the hospital doesn't really know how to deal with them.
No, and every time a neurodivergent person's in hospital and sees another staff member doing the same task but in a different way, or the rules always shift slightly and we're not really sure what's real, what is the system, what are the rules here.
That's awful.
It is awful. It is not fun. Neurotypical person doesn't care so much that the rules keep changing because they're a bit more flexible and adaptive. Neurodivergent person's like, can we be consistent, please? And if you're struggling with that in hospital, get out. Go find a therapist who understands neurodivergence, autism, ADHD, different neurologies, because the hospital not so brilliant for you.
I just want to say that it is not just if you're struggling with that in hospital. Yes, if you're struggling with that in hospital, get out. If you are struggling with that rule shift and this person did in a different way than that person, what was that? Why? In any environment, in a school environment, in a home environment, and it can be something as minor as the substitute teacher did a different routine than your normal teacher would and it threw you off, or someone put the mugs back in the wrong shelf. A change in the system is an indication that maybe you should look into this.
This is me holding on to my thought.
Okay, I'm recording.
Okay, on the topic of school, not necessarily being a good place for neurodivergent, I've hated school since I was 3 in kindergarten. So 14 years. I have always felt like I didn't fit in. I didn't understand the way that teachers were teaching. For the first 5 years, I was in an extension class. I was ahead of my class. I was super smart compared to everyone else, way above the normal academic level for people my age. Until I got to my 6th year of school, and then I started to fall behind because I just didn't get it anymore. I couldn't understand it. I was struggling. I couldn't get myself to do the homework. I couldn't do the work in class. I was getting distracted, all of this stuff. And it's funny how no one picked up on that until recently. And then I got into high school and it got a lot worse, but especially because, okay, it's different everywhere. In Victoria, year 11 and 12 are your VCE, Victoria Certificate of Education. It's your last 2 years of high school. I am in year 11, so my first year of my VCE, and I am dropping out of school. It is awful. It is ruining my mental health. Not only the way that I am forced to learn, but also the people in that school aren't great. Even like in the years leading up to this year, it's almost that feeling of like being shoved into a box is too small for you. Like everyone is put in the same size box, but your box is just a little bit smaller than everyone else's, and it's just uncomfortable. It doesn't fit quite right.
Or maybe you're not the same sized box inhabitant. I like to
But
think
yeah.
of boxes in terms of cats. When you shove a cat in a box, it doesn't like you. If you get a box out, the cat will probably decide to get in the box and love it. That's autism down pat. Don't put me in a box. Don't put me in your box. If you have a box that I like the look of, I might get in it and own it, and it's my box now. But don't tell me what box I'm getting into. Don't tell me what to do, and don't try to squeeze me into the box you've defined for me. Don't know if that helps.
Yeah, it does a lot. The other thing is, so I take music and drama at my school currently that I'm enrolled in, that I don't really go to anymore. I haven't attended a class in 3 months. I love music and drama outside of the school environment.
Yeah.
I hate it at school. It's everything to do with the coursework and the way the course is outlined, but it's nothing to do with the topics themselves. I do theatre externally, which is music, drama, and dance. I thrive in that. It's probably where I am my best self. It's pretty much the same as high school. It's not at all. And it's really weird to like compare the two. They're the same thing in different environments, and one works a lot better than the other.
Two thoughts on that. One, the drama and music you choose to attend is your choice. And two, they're probably treating you more like you're an adult than a child.
My entire life, I have hated being babied. I am mature for my age because of my experiences. Trauma, neurodivergent, all of this stuff. Without even seeing my appearance, I've been speaking to people and they're like, oh, so you're like 19, 20, right? I'm 16 at the moment.
I was reading a meme the other day that said, old soul, that's what we used to call autistic. That's just coding. Oh, you're very mature for your age. Probably autistic or ADHD. You seem to be able to handle chaos or emergencies well. So you're ADHD.
While I was growing up, my dad's friends kept being like, you're really immature. You're 8, 10, 12, I don't know. Sitting at a table of adults, having conversation with them. Do you want to go outside and play with the kids? No, why would I want to do that? This is where the interesting conversation is. I was often told, like, you seem like one of the adults, and I never really got along with kids my age until we started doing the maturing thing, and then suddenly they started making more sense because I could actually have an intellectual conversation with them. Maybe that's correlation and not causation. Who knows? Certainly not me. I only had one go at the whole childhood thing.
Similarly, for me, as a child, I would play with the adults and usually converse with them and not really understand the other kids. And as an adult, I would be lumped in with the kids because I was differently mature and they actually really connected well with me. I blame your parents. Sorry, mate.
Yeah. Oh, darn my parents. They've done so much good for me, but just this once. Anyway, I love my parents a lot.
My parents owned a pub, so I grew up in that environment. I was pretty much forced to talk to adults because I would spend my days, if I wasn't at school, there, except on the weekends. So like school holidays, I would be at the pub, and I would be able at 7 years old to hold proper conversations with 40-year-olds. I was once said as a 12-year-old, oh, what subjects, like what VCE subjects are you doing this year? I was 12. People who do VCE, 16 to 18.
So speaking of VCE and school, I have a number of youth clients. Quite a few of them struggle so much with the school system that I recommend that they actually exit the high school system and study remotely or wait until they're old enough to go to TAFE, which is kind of like community college for some other countries, where you can do a year 11, 12 equivalency course. Either you do year 11 and 12 remotely through the interwebs because that's a much better environment for you, or you go back and do it as an adult and get that certification. No one cares where your year 12 equivalent certificate comes from. They just care you've got it. They don't even care how well you do. They just care that you've got it.
School is not the only pathway. High school is not the only pathway. If you want to go to college or university or whatever you call tertiary education where you are, there are multiple pathways into that. But going to a tertiary education is not the only pathway. you've got so many options. A lot of people just tell you that this is the way it is done and fail to mention all of the other awesome options that you can partake in.
And one last note on that, you're frequently pushed to get the highest score you can to give you the best options you can. That's rubbish. You only need enough to get into that tertiary education. And then once there, generally, you can do bridging courses to go further. There are only a few, maybe 3 courses here in Western Australia you cannot do at university without a high enough entry score. Everything else, once you're in the system, you're in. So why do the high schools push you to get such high scores? Because that's part of their funding. They're not doing it for your best interests.
2 things to add on to that. First of all, even if you want to go for those courses that need that higher level, you can always work your way up to that. You can start in an easier course that's related to that and get good grades in that, transfer into that course, do well in what you enjoy, transfer into a higher level. Like, it's not like high school isn't the be all and end all. Speaking as a 16-year-old, almost 17-year-old who has struggled with high school, who hates high school is not the only pathway. I'm starting TAFE next year as an alternative way to complete year 12. Also looked into another option of doing an extended VCE. So I would do year 11 this year, year 12 over the course of 2 years to release the stress. So I would do 3 subjects next year, 2 subjects the year after. I didn't like the idea of that because I just wanted to get the hell out of there straight away. Like, if I could already be in university, I would, because I hate high school.
Some universities will do an end of year 11, 12 bridging course so you can go straight into university next year. It is an option.
I wanted to say that this is extra interesting to me because I felt the exact opposite. I really liked high school. It worked well for me. Some of the people there didn't. I preferred the exam structure to the class structure in some subjects. University did not work for my brain. Not one bit of university was working for my brain. The best bit of university was the tutorials where we talked to each other as if we were in a high school class. And even then I was still like, I want to be in my year 12 English class instead of this university classroom.
Fair also,
Yeah.
you were in the middle of a pandemic, changing the rules constantly every other week.
Yeah,
Speaking
and
of rules,
with the online classes, I could do online tutorials. That's fine. That was basically just a Discord call. Doing the actually interesting, interacting with my peers, hearing what they have to say, working on things. If I zoned out, no one cared because I couldn't see, but I was still like interested and invested in kind of in taking information. Online tutorials worked well for me. Online discussions. Online lectures, no, nothing. I have sat here for an hour and a half listening to you talk, and none of it has entered my brain because for me, I need to be pretending to pay attention in order to actually pay attention. If I am not in the classroom environment for lectures, it does not enter my brain. When I was doing university, they had in-person tutorials and online lectures. Like, it was all online, and then they were like, oh, we can come back so we can do in-person tutorials, but not lectures. I was like, that's the wrong way around. Can we do it the other way around? Because then I might be able to focus.
For me, being in high school during the pandemic is awful. I can't work in environments that I've associated other things to, which I'm pretty sure is a neurodivergent trait. I have associated my room with sleep, chilling out. This is my safe space. I can't get work done in my safe space because it is my safe space. Anywhere else in the house, too loud, can't cope, will have a panic attack trying to get stuff done. If I sit in a library, I could get something done, but all the libraries are closed because of the pandemic. Being forced to learn in an environment that I've associated with other stuff is impossible. The only work I can get done in my room is stuff to do with Twitch because it's fun.
and that's not linked with high school shenanigans. So that makes sense. Pattern routine can be a useful tool for some of the spectrum of ADHD. Routine tasks are cheaper than the same tasks separated. And if the routine breaks, it's really hard to do the parts.
You have to re-regulate.
Yeah.
You have to spend
It's-
extra energy to regulate so that you can do the things you were going to do anyway.
If you're walking, it's easy. If you start thinking about exactly how you're walking becomes really hard. That's the difference between a skill that you have loosely called muscle memory versus conscious memory. A conscious memory is very specific. You're thinking about the bits and the pieces and so forth and so forth. Whereas when it's automatic, it just happens. When ADHD brain decides that these 5 tasks are a routine, they're automatic, they're easy, they're simple, they're cheap. You get started on the first bit that flows into the second, third, fourth. Whereas if you have to separate them out to 1, 2, 3, what am I going to forget? What do I need to remember? How do I do this well and efficiently? How do I flow? How do I do this without conscious thought? So much harder. I was very lonely in school and I did not know why. One of the things I found difficult in school was that each teacher had their own system and they didn't seem to understand they were doing it wrong. You can't all be right because there's only one set of rules for how the school's supposed to work. And yet here you are doing it different.
And it's like they pick and choose from the school rules about which ones apply and which ones don't. The school rules are not supposed to be optional.
And who too?
Why do we even have uniforms? I hate the feeling of the pants that they offer. I hate the feeling of the shirts, the tie, the fact that I can't have my hair a different color that's not natural. How does that affect how I learn? How does me wearing 2 earrings instead of 1 affect how I'm meant to learn? How does me wearing a jumper over the top of my already uncomfortable uniform to ease my discomfort affecting the way I learn? Why? It's my biggest issue with the school system.
A lot of primary school is teaching conformity and obedience. High school, especially if it's a private school, is pushing that conformity and obedience, whilst your own teenage brain is looking for a peer group to belong to that is not your parents. And in a public school, high school, by the way, public here in Australia means the government controls it. Private means that it's not really government regulated. It's just some countries have it the other way around. Here, public schools allow a bit more individuality in high school, but there's still a lot of peer pressure and conformity pushing principles, except that it's not consistent. If you're one of the popular kids or one of the sports kids, you get all these breaks that the nerds don't. If you don't fit, good luck.
Cut to 12-year-old me being like, why am I not popular? Why do I not fit in? Why does everyone hate me? It's because my brain is different.
That's an uncanny valley, which Toy Story discovered the hard way. Think of it like this in robots. If the robot is clearly a machine, it's just a machine that behaves a little like a human. We know it's a machine and therefore it is fine. And if it gets destroyed, who cares? The closer the machine seems human, the more we start investing in it, but the more weird it gets. Until it is so human-like that we think it's human. So accept it's one of us. Neurodivergent peoples frequently fit in that valley of where it starts getting almost human, but not human enough. And so there's this instinctive rejection of the differences because you don't really understand what people mean when they say that thing. It could mean one of 4 things. We're waiting for a clue to narrow it down to 1. So our response rate's a bit slower. Or we start acting on our assumption that it's actually option 2, only to discover actually it's option 3. And then we have to quickly correct. And that slight difference in response speed kind of clues the other people in that we don't really belong in this group. They have an instinctive rejection of us. And it's not going to be everyone. It's just going to be some people. Also, bullies are looking for people who are without support to pick on so that they can feel better in and of themselves. So the bullies detect the difference that is you and that you don't have support, so they bully you. And of course, you not knowing the rules of engagement, think, aren't the teachers supposed to stop this? I mean, it's right there in the charter. It's right there in the policies and the procedures. It's right there in the rules. Every assembly, they talk to us about how we're supposed to be kind, respectful, inclusive, and not mean to each other. And yet, why aren't the teachers stopping this? And that is because it's not actually their job. Their job is to stop you from dying, being visibly hurt on school property, and to try and get you to pass if you're not too difficult to teach, which means you have to learn how to defend yourself from bullies. So school has these rules that we're supposed to live by that everyone is agreeing to, but the rules aren't consistent and the rules often don't make sense. And that's kind of similar in a way to hospital, which also neurodivergent people often don't fit well in, especially if they struggle with inconsistent rules. And workplaces, working in teams in a workplace is hard unless there's enough other divergent people on the same team, such that the neurotypicals have to adjust to us, which is why neurodivergent people often work in solo teams. Oh, yes, I can do that group thing, but I work better on my own.
Teachers kept trying to put me in group projects, and I was like, please, no. Please, I would rather do all the work by myself. And they're also like, don't you want to go outside at recess and interact with your peers? And I'm like, A, I don't want to put my work down because I'm enjoying it. B, if I put my work down, am I ever going to come back to it? C, why would I want to interact with my peers? They certainly don't want to interact with me.
This is where home education is actually quite good, because when you are on a streak doing this task, you keep doing it until you are ready to put it down. At school, though, they say, time's up, pack up, go to the next class. No, I'm in the middle of something.
I was very lucky in high school. There were a number of times where I didn't want to put down the work from one class, so they made me move and I went to the next class and I just continued doing that work. Sometimes my teachers were like, what are you doing? And I'm like, math. And they're like, this is your technology class. What is it that you wanted me to do in this technology class? And they thought for a second and they were like, you're right, I'm just giving a lecture and you're already ahead. So I guess as long as you're not distracting anybody else and you can still tell me what I've said, enjoy your math. I am almost done with my math homework, and if I just keep doing it now, I don't actually have to bring it home. So I was very lucky in that I was mostly ahead in my classes enough and had enough of an understanding with my teachers that they just let me get away with stuff like doing the work that wasn't of that subject and not conforming to the rules the school is supposed to have.
Similarly, because I was able to fly under the annoyed teacher radar, meant that I could do the assignment that was due next lesson in this lesson, and I would do that on a frequent basis. And I would listen to my fellow students, having spent the last several days stressing about the assignment that I just polished off in an hour. And I would get good marks.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
then they'd go, how did you do that? Well, it's easy. I just did it. Well, why didn't you start it last week?
If it weren't for the last minute, none of us would get anything done. Wise words of my grandfather.
I cannot do things in advance. I would either do it the night before, the morning of, the class before. I couldn't do it before that. And
Yeah.
everyone's like, you can't study for the exam like right before it is. I'm like,
Hold
oh,
my
look at me. I feel like I retain the information better if it's fresh in my mind, if I've just gone over it.
Makes sense.
Autistic trick for remembering information. Here's a bit of information. What can I tie this to? The more you can tie it to, the more you remember it. ADHD trick, make it recent, make it emotional.
The adrenaline and the stress of, oh, this is due in the morning, gives you enough energy to actually keep going with it. Makes it interesting enough.
Because what's your other choice? Hand it in late. There is a group in the spectrum for ADHD where you stop caring about consequences and then things get a lot harder. Try not to lose that.
I'm trying to stop laughing, but I can't stop laughing at the spider in my head.
It's been fun, guys. Thank you.
This has been fun. I would love to do this more and possibly more often. I will look into the logistics of maybe making this a regular thing. I don't want to commit to anything right
I was saying
now.
we should put these episodes on Spotify.
Thank you for joining me.
I really appreciate the invitation, and hopefully what I said was helpful and useful.
Definitely. A lot of us are talking from our own experiences, but you also have actual training in this. You have, like, for lack of a better term, industry knowledge. You can say, according to research, or, you know, a number of my clients, like, you have a larger sample size than just me, and my friends experience the same things.
Which is an interesting sample size. I've got to admit, the most I've learned about both ADHD and autism is looking at forum communities where people talk openly about their experience, and people have put the effort into creating memes to speak about how they feel and how they experience. And I go, that makes sense. I get that. Which is why I highly recommend you check out such sites. I'm sure you'll link to a bunch of really useful ones.
Yeah, I'm sure I will too. You're gonna send me those, right? Okay, good. A lot of what I've learned and the oh of course moments have come from hello spider, have come from scrolling through Instagram and having it just recommend me ADHD thing after ADHD thing after, oh look, an autism thing mixed in after ADHD thing. I'm like, yeah, you know your target audience, and thank you for teaching me things. The other thing I think is useful with the fact that this knowledge of neurodivergence relates to not just your life but your job, Dad, is that you have more experience than us explaining the what and the why, also knowing what needs explanation. Like, there's been a couple of times that I haven't even thought of that you've stopped and you've given a definition. I would never have thought of that. It's been so useful to have you here. Thank you.
You're most welcome.
Fun fact, Worm's spider is named Shay and my spider is named Worm.
This is useful information.
There were times where, you know, Worm hugged the spider, and so I picked up my spider and hugged the spider because that is us saying I am hugging you. It's very cute. Okay, that's all. Goodbye.
Love that. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.